They say that patience is a virtue, but in my case, patience was a weapon. Imagine sitting on your back porch, sipping a cold drink, and watching your neighbor spend thousands of dollars on a project that you know, with absolute certainty, will be reduced to toothpicks within a month. It sounds cruel, but when you are dealing with someone who refuses to listen to reason, sometimes you have to let them dig their own grave. My neighbor, a man named Gary, decided that the laws of the city and the rules of our neighborhood simply didn't apply to him. He wanted a fortress, and he was determined to build it, even if it meant stealing my sunlight and violating every building code in the book. Before we get into the satisfying moment where the city's heavy machinery arrived to tear his dream apart, I want to take a second to talk to you. If you've ever been in a situation where a bully thought they could walk all over you because they had more money or a louder voice, then you know how lonely that feels. But you aren't alone. Here at Karen Hub, we believe that the law is the great equalizer. We are building a community that values property rights, respect, and the sweet taste of justice. If you want to see more bullies get what's coming to them, hit that subscribe button right now. Your subscription helps us keep this channel alive and ensures that stories like Gary's are told to the world. Join us, and let's stand up for common sense together. The drama began on a Tuesday morning when a flatbed truck loaded with massive, industrial-grade timber pulled into Gary's driveway. Now, Gary had always been a boundary pusher. He was the kind of guy who would park his boat on the street for weeks or let his dog bark at 3 in the morning. But this was different. He had hired a crew of unlicensed contractors to build what he called a privacy wall. But this wasn't just a wall. As the days went by, it became clear that Gary was building a literal fortress. We are talking about a structure that was 14 feet high, made of heavy pressure-treated wood, and it extended right up to the very edge of my property line. In our city, the maximum height for a residential fence is 6 feet, and you need a setback of at least 3 feet from the property line. Gary was breaking every single rule. When I first approached Gary to ask if he had a permit, he laughed and told me to mind my own business. He told me that his brother-in-law was a big shot at the city planning office and that he had been given a verbal green light. I knew that was a lie. City planning doesn't give verbal green lights for 14-foot-tall wooden fortresses in suburban backyards. I could have called the police right then. I could have stood in front of the trucks. But I remembered the advice my grandfather once gave me. If someone is determined to destroy themselves, don't get in their way. I decided to let him build. I watched as day after day, his crew hammered and sawed. I watched as Gary bragged to the other neighbors about how much he was spending. Nearly $25,000 on premium materials and labor. He was so proud of his fortress. He thought he had successfully bullied me into submission. What Gary didn't know was that I was documenting every single hour of the construction. I had high-definition security cameras capturing the lack of safety equipment, the violation of the property line, and even the moments where his crew accidentally damaged my gutters. I also contacted the city's building inspector on day 1. But I didn't ask them to stop him. I asked them to open a file and wait until the structure was completed. Why? Because in my city, if a structure is under construction, the fines are small. But if a structure is completed and found to be in violation of a stop work order, the city has the power to not only fine the owner, but to send their own demolition crew and bill the homeowner for the cost. I wanted Gary to feel the full weight of his arrogance. By the end of the second week, the fortress of Gary was finished. It was an eyesore. It blocked the wind. It blocked my view of the valley, and it cast a dark shadow over my entire garden. Gary held a small completion party on his deck, shouting over the fence about how some people just don't have the vision to build something great. I stayed inside, checked my cameras, and saw the building inspector's truck pull up to the curb. Gary's smile vanished when the inspector handed him a bright orange notice of violation. Gary tried his usual bullying tactics. He yelled, he threatened to call his connections, and he eventually threw the notice on the ground. The inspector calmly told him that he had 48 hours to pull a permit or tear it down. Gary did neither. He thought the city was bluffing. A week passed, and the fines started to accumulate. $100 a day turned into $500 a day. Gary was still defiant. He even posted on his social media that he was fighting the system, and that his wall was a symbol of his freedom. But the city doesn't care about your social media posts. They care about safety and zoning laws. Because the wall was 14 feet high and not anchored into the ground with proper footings, it was declared a hazardous structure. If a strong wind came, that wall would have crushed my house. This gave the city the legal right to take emergency action. On a Wednesday morning, exactly 1 month after the first truck arrived, Gary woke up to a sound he never expected to hear. It wasn't the sound of birds or the wind. It was the sound of a heavy-duty excavator and a wood chipper. The city had arrived. They didn't come to talk. They came with a police escort and a demolition permit signed by a judge. Gary ran out of his house in his pajamas, screaming at the top of his lungs. He tried to stand in front of the excavator, but the police officer on site quickly moved him back. "This is my property. You can't do this," Gary yelled. The officer simply pointed to the court order and said, "Sir, you were given 30 days. Your time is up." I sat on my porch with my camera, recording the entire thing. It was like watching a movie. The excavator's giant metal claw reached up and grabbed the top of Gary's 14-foot fortress. With one powerful tug, the premium cedar snapped like toothpicks. Gary literally fell to his knees in his driveway as he watched $25,000 of his hard-earned money being turned into mulch. The crew was efficient. They didn't just knock it down. They fed every single board into the industrial wood chipper. Within 4 hours, the fortress of Gary was nothing but a pile of wood chips in the back of a city dump truck. But the nightmare for Gary was only beginning. 2 weeks later, he received a bill in the mail. The city charged him $6,000 for the demolition crew, $4,000 for the police escort and administrative fees, and an additional $10,000 in accumulated fines. When you add that to the $25,000 he spent building the wall, Gary had lost $45,000 in a single month. And the best part? He still had no wall. He was back to exactly where he started, except now his bank account was empty and his reputation in the neighborhood was ruined. Gary tried to sue the city, and he even tried to sue me for conspiracy. But his case was laughed out of court before it even started. The judge told him that the only person responsible for his loss was the man he saw in the mirror every morning. Gary eventually had to sell his boat and his trucks just to pay off the city's liens on his house. He doesn't brag anymore. He doesn't shout over the fence. Now, when he sees me in the backyard, he looks at the ground and walks inside. He learned the hard way that you can't build a fortress on a foundation of lies. If you are dealing with a neighbor like Gary, remember this: you don't always have to fight fire with fire. Sometimes you just have to let the fire burn itself out. Document everything, know your local laws, and let the authorities do their job. Arrogance always has an expiration date. If you enjoyed the story of the city versus the fortress, please make sure to subscribe and share this video. We have more stories of justice and Karen takedowns coming your way every single day. Thank you for being part of the Karen Hub family, and we'll see you in the next one.